Oh, hello, Michelle. How are you?
I'm great, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm so pumped to hang out with you. I'm just like, it's been like a hot second for some unfortunate reason. Although I'm constantly talking about you because I'm constantly talking about crushing quota. So I guess maybe I like feel like we hang out more than we do, which is, we got to do this more often. I'm so glad to see you.
Me too. Thanks, Pete. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, hey everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna have an awesome event today talking about manager enablement here with the queen of sales management and why sales management is important and how to be an awesome sales manager. Michelle Vazana, who's the author of Crushing Quota, one of my favorite books about being an awesome sales manager. While folks are kind of like joining us here, we'll kind of like let folks trickle in here for a second. But Michelle, are you like going anywhere? I think you said you were going to be going to Europe, or did you just get back from Europe? What was the
I just got
deal?
back
What's the
from
dilly
Europe.
there?
Yeah. What's that?
I said, what was the deal? Where'd you go? How was it?
Well, so here's what's interesting. I flew over to Europe to catch a cruise out of Venice, and I
Oh,
tested
rad.
positive for COVID at the cruise terminal. And I had to turn around and go home. It was
You
a
had to
real drag. Yeah.
come home, or you had to stay in Venice?
No, I had to come home. I actually didn't have COVID. It was a false positive, but it didn't matter
Oh,
at that point. By that point, my cruise was gone, and oh well. But
oh
yeah,
my goodness.
one of
But
those. Oops. Yeah.
oh my goodness gracious. Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, when we don't, at least in this case, you got an amazing story out of it.
Yeah, it did. And see, I'm here with you, Pete. If I had caught that cruise, I probably wouldn't be here with you. So there
Oh,
you go.
well, like, I
My
mean,
silver lining.
then yay, even though that's a bummer. Okay, awesome. Well, we can get jamming here. I'm really excited about this topic because it's something that I really care about, and it's something that Michelle really cares a lot about, and then more importantly, it's something that Michelle knows a ton about. And specifically, it's why excellence in sales management is so important and how to actually make that happen. So actually, why don't we just do a couple of introductions here quickly. I'll go first just so I can get out of the way, and we can let our illustrious guest, who is the focus, go come second. I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. I'm also our CRO, which is like fancy speak for responsible for revenue. For folks who don't know, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that exists to help sales managers use data and metrics to improve rep performance, right? That's like the name of the game, improve rep performance. Prior to that, I started a software company called TalentBin, was founded in 2010. That's where I kind of got into sales. I was a business generalist founder, and then our first sales rep, and then our first sales manager and eventual sales leader. And then we were acquired in 2014 by Monster Worldwide. And then subsequent to that, I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales. Actually, I don't know if I think I probably have your book like on my desk here somewhere, Michelle. Actually, both of your books. And so that's a little bit about me. Michelle, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody who's here today?
So again, I'm so glad to be here, Pete. Thanks for bringing me into your conference. So my name is Michelle Vazana. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and one of the co-founders of Vantage Point. I've been in this space my entire career, so I'm kind of a one-trick pony. Everything I've ever done in sales. And about 14 years ago, I got really passionate about sales management and started doing research into sales management with other colleagues. And that was really our entire focus in Vantage Point for the first 7 years of our existence. So lots of energy in the area, lots of research on that area. We've recently expanded our focus into sales agility, which encompasses the entire sales force. So the manager piece, the really critical piece, is really sort of the top of our pyramid around sales agility, and really the enabling force, this force multiplier for true sales performance and field level execution.
That's a really good point because, like, I mean, first you need to have a capability. And this is something we run into all the time. I'm so excited to like geek out with you on this. This is something that we run into all the time at Atrium. Is like, you know, Atrium is the software that helps managers use data to improve team performance, and the way that it does that is like by monitoring, you know, dozens and dozens of KPIs in order to help the managers understand, like, hey, here's this issue right here with this rep, and then like go fix it. But the problem is that the manager can't manage, right? Like, is incapable of having that, you know, that performance conversation or holding reps accountable or whatever. You know, it's kind of like, what's the point? And I think that's a, like, the notion of like organizational agility, like whether you need to change your sales motion or you're moving into a different segment or whatever. If you don't have, like, you can come up with that new messaging, right? Or you can come up with that new sales motion, that new go to market. But if you're not able to then drive it into the field through managers, then like,
Right.
what's the point? Right. So like having the capability of managers who are able to like manage, I know it sounds kind of nonsense, ends up being extraordinarily important. So it makes sense that that's a natural, like a natural extension of your work on management, is like, cool, once you have that capability, now you have this superpower to, like, you know, to be more agile. I'm pumped to talk more about that. Just a couple housekeeping items here. These are the things we're going to talk about, like why manager enablement is super important, how that's different than like rep enablement and what have you. You know, how data and metrics can kind of help with this. That's obviously the thing that I care about very deeply. I mean, Michelle as well. And you know, some of the kind of stuff around metrics, and then why organizational agility is key to manager enablement. One thing I wanted to call out here, if you'd like to sign up for a copy of Michelle's book, Crushing Quota, and also get yourself a handy dandy little you know, coffees for closers Yeti. We're going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat here for folks that go ahead and sign up for that. We love giving away copies of Michelle's book. We've done it hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000, maybe not 1,000 yet, but we've done it, definitely done it like hundreds and hundreds, sent out hundreds and hundreds of copies of Michelle's book. It's absolutely fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough. And it's fantastic for managers. It's fantastic for managers of managers to think about what their managers should be doing. It's fantastic for sales operations and enablement people to kind of think about, like, to have empathy for managers in their organization. It's just delightful. Cool. So like, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about like why we're discussing manager enablement here. And I think the big thing that we talk about here at Atrium, because like we think about our mission as being to help these AE, SDR, AMCSM managers use data to improve team performance. And the reason why that's so important is because high performing managers really are the crux of a high performing organization. And it's not just us that says this, it's also Gartner says this as well. And then also there's this lady, Michelle Vazana, who talks about this as well. She's very, you know, very esteemed, but it drives all sorts of great great output. So higher rep productivity, better retention, better effort. But the really, really big thing that I always take away from this is that what great managers do is they take reps who are like solid and make them awesome. And they take reps who are like, okay, right? Or like, and they make them solid. And that's like, and like essentially like you're engaging in alchemy, where you're taking lead and you turn it into bronze and then you like turn it into gold. And so that's the big thing, is that it really drives you elevate these reps and make more of them be top performers. And I pulled a bunch of stats from Michelle's book here. And again, I can't recommend Michelle's book most highly enough, but like this is a really like powerful thing that like what ends up happening is, yeah, those managers drive more revenue than, like, unsurprisingly, but the way that they do that is by getting more reps to quota, right? It's not just like, you can't just like to take your high performers, like make them super high performers or whatever, because at a certain point it's like there's only 50 hours in a week, right? Michelle, you want to comment on some of these things? It's
So,
obviously it's from your book.
yeah, I can talk a little bit about it, Pete. So what we found that was really interesting, you are talking about metrics, which are vital because you have to understand whether you're making progress or not. And you have to understand making
Yeah.
the right kind of progress. So,
Yep.
we've been studying sales managers and sales manager performance and practices for years. And
Yep.
most organizations that we've worked with use revenue as the primary performance metric for managers.
Exactly.
And
Right.
when we took a look at revenue production, clearly high performers were significantly higher than low performers, 39% higher. But there was something that was kind of masked for the core performers. You know, Gartner and others talking about the core, that middle 50%. And when we put revenue production, the middle 50% in our studies were hovering about at revenue quota. Of course, the lower performers were not. But if you looked at it just based on revenue, what happened is it looks like, wow, 75% of the managers in our studies were at or above quota. But it was really misleading because when we looked at a different metric, speaking of metrics, when we looked at a performance metric, which is what is the percentage of sellers on your team at or above quota? All of a sudden, that core group almost mirrored the lowest performance group. And so the core and the lowest performance group were hovering around 48% of their team at quota. And then the high performers, the top 25%, had 65% of their sellers at quota. So there was a huge gap. And those core performers were over relying on a couple of high performing reps in order to into their revenue quota, which really does not reflect good management. It reflects, you know, someone who's really doing more selling than managing and over relying on a few high performers.
Right. Or like they lucked out, right? Or like they found they lucked out, they got a couple reps who are killers. Or as you point out, like maybe what they're doing is they're spending their time with some more reps and like selling through them. Or alternatively, like maybe they have their people who like they've worked with for a while and they like pull them from job to job or whatever. But like they're not in the business of that alchemy of like improving reps and making them higher performing. That's really fascinating that you bring that up, Michelle, because a colleague of mine, Robert Wabi, the CEO of HighSpot, talks about this quite a bit, and he calls it participation rate. And we talk about it. And the interesting thing, like he and I were geeking out about sales metrics the other day, and we were talking about participation rate, not just from a quota standpoint, like, okay, cool, you've got 6 reps that report into you, you got 8 reps that report into you, what proportion of them are getting to quota per se, but then also like expanding that, and then like looking at it from the standpoint of like, okay, how many are at the 25th percentile, how many are at the like 50th percentile, and how many are at the 75th percentile? Because you can have a situation where you have like 2 reps who are like at 150%, and they're masking, right? Like they're masking the fact that there's like 3 or 4 reps that are down at like 60%. And so if you only look at averages or totals, you'd be like, oh, everything's hunky dory, right? But obviously it's not, right? Because these reps over here are just like wildly underperforming. And so I think you can actually extend that not just to quota, but you can extend it to all other manner of metrics as well. Like, you know, what is your win rate participation rate? What is your, you know, what is your activity participation rate, a customer facing meeting participation rate? What is your average selling price participation rate? Because then what that allows you to do as a manager is, especially as a leader, you can kind of say like, uh-oh, this team over here has a participation rate and win rate problem. And then this team over here has like a different participate, or alternatively, like this team, everybody's high performing with respect to, I don't know, like self-sourced rep ops or what have you. That's really fascinating. And so literally like the core managers and the low performing managers, like that participation rate was the same with both of them. That's crazy. So like, is it like the core performers are like lucky? Oh, I think I lost.
Am I back?
What were you saying, Michelle? Yeah, you're back. What were you saying? What was 40%?
I was saying the bottom 25% had 48% of their reps at quota. The middle 50% had 49%. So we're talking not even a whole rep, right? We're talking a fraction of a rep.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and I think there's another thing here that is like, so then there's like the problem statement of like, hey, look, managers, like the high performing managers get more reps than quota. And then I think there's the question of like, okay, well then how do we do that? And I think there's these other stats here really kind of point, speak to that, which is you got to make sure that your reps are, or sorry, your managers, geez, we're talking about managers, not rep speed. You got to make sure that your managers are coaching. And then moreover, you have to do things with those managers. You can't just be like, hey, you should like be
Right.
coaching more. Can you maybe like speak to this a little bit? Because I think this actually like runs counter to a lot of how a lot of organizations think about this, because they're like, oh well, like if our reps are not asking the right disco questions or they're not doing XYZ appropriately, like obviously we should deploy our sales enablement resources against that, because like,
Right.
you know, that like then the reps are going to be selling poorly. But it's almost like it's unlevered, right? Versus
Yeah, it's
helping the
true.
managers.
It's true.
Yeah, like
It's like,
can you share more about that?
well, I mean, everyone understands sports, right? There's sports fans every time we have one of these webinars. And if you have a
Woohoo!
crappy coach, it's going to have an outsized impact on the effectiveness of the team,
That's
right?
right.
And it's the same thing for a sales team. And so we know from our research that managers are the biggest influencer of what sellers do, of the
Yep.
actions they take, what they execute, who they focus on, how they focus. And we ignore these managers, right? We assume that just because we promoted a highly performing seller to manager, that they're all of a sudden become a rock star manager. And
Nope.
it's a very different job. I mean, in fact, there's very little overlap between what it's like to be a rep and what it's like to be a manager. All of a sudden, prioritization is king. And all of a
Yep.
sudden, I've got 10,000 things to do a day and I got time to do about 10 of them,
I
right?
know,
And
right?
so it's really a hostile environment. And what happens is that
Oh
sellers
yeah,
who are
you're just
used to,
surrounded by alligators, right?
it's crazy, and reps who are
Yeah.
used to kind of controlling their own destiny and calling their own shots, all
Oh
of a
my gosh.
sudden have almost no flexibility, right? Their sales
Yep.
leaders breathing down their neck for the forecast. Everybody
Yep.
wants a piece of them. They've got
Yep.
bigger teams than they've ever had. And they have
Yep.
such a hard time sorting through this chaos in order to identify, of all the things I could be focusing on, what should I be focusing on and why? And that's where the training comes in. Because in order to help reps sell more
Yes.
effectively, you have to train them and you have to coach them. It's the same thing with
Yes.
managers. In order to help
I know.
managers manage more effectively, you have to train them and then you have to coach them. So there's all
Yep.
these dynamics about being an effective sales manager, primarily around prioritizing effort and aligning effort that they're never taught how to do. So let's think about
Yeah.
metrics for a minute, Pete, because that's sort of your gig, right? You're all about metrics and using data to better manage the sales force.
We
But
are sales nerds. Yes, we are
think
sales
about
nerds over here.
think
It is
about the
true.
challenge that managers face when they've got a tech stack, 20 deep, and then they've
Mhm.
got 4 or 5 dashboards they have to pay attention to.
Mhm.
And it's like we keep throwing ingredients at them. But
Mhm.
without the recipe, you're not going to have a good outcome,
Yeah,
right? So this
100%.
idea of taking all these individual pieces, whether it be
Yep.
the CRM system, whether it be the data-driven sales management through Atrium, whether it be the sales methodology, all these pieces are important, but managers don't know how to put them together in the
Yeah, they
in the
need to know
process of their
how to
day-to-day job.
yeah, how to synthesize like in their
Right.
operating rhythm,
That's
et
right.
cetera. Like, yeah, this is why one of the big things that we talk, like I do a bunch of classes on operating rhythms and like structuring
Hmm.
your existence in order to make sure. We have a joke on our team. The phrase is calendar is destiny, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to make sure that you have space on the calendar and recurring space on the calendar in order to make sure that like, that those data driven one-on-ones are happening, right? And those are different than pipe reviews and like those
Hmm.
coaching sessions and so on and so forth. And I think that one of the things that we observed is that organizations really think about like manager enablement as an afterthought. And so one of the ways that we've attacked that is we actually work with a gentleman named Richard Harris, who's a lovely
Yeah.
um, sales trainer. He's absolutely fantastic, and we actually have him monthly do a half day sales manager boot camp with our customers. We also invite members of the community as well, and I think maybe actually we could drop a link into the chat here around that. But essentially the reason why is because like our customer success team helps our customers and our managers use data to effectively
Hmm.
manage, but like
Yeah.
they're not teaching the managers like how to have a performance conversation, right?
Hmm.
Or like how to hold somebody accountable or how to run an effective one-on-one. And so like those are the sort of things like you got to teach your managers how to do that, or else like they're just gonna wing it. And I think that that's like a key insight for a lot of these
Yeah.
organizations is like they gotta provide that structure to those managers and like their operating rhythm, and then also like take them through the actual motions so they have like that, so they have those muscles.
I couldn't agree more. And the challenge that a lot of organizations have, and this is another really kind of interesting finding, is that when they put structure into sales management, they tend to over-engineer it. It's almost
Mm.
like an over-engineered sales methodology with 200 steps. Well, nobody's going to do that. Who has time to do that? And so I've worked with many organizations who've been frustrated. They've thrown up their hands. They've trained their managers on how to coach. They put together operating rhythms. And when I take a look at the detail within those operating rhythms, they're not achievable. In fact, the only way a manager could actually execute some of these manager playbooks is if he wasn't managing any reps. So they're designed to work in optimal circumstances with very few distractions, which is just the opposite of what managers face. So one of the unsuspected outcomes from a lot of our different research studies was that the most successful sales managers, they don't coach more. So many people say that.
Mm.
And I ask, where's your research? Show me your research that shows that the most successful sales managers coach more hours than their less successful peers, and they can't provide it because it's not true. And time after time, we've studied organizations across the globe for many years. And every company that we have studied, their highest performers coach fewer hours than the lower performers, but they coach differently. So one
What's
of
the
the things,
difference?
the difference is the highest performing sales managers are much more discriminating about what they coach, when they
Yeah,
coach,
totally.
and how they coach. So they
Sure.
coach less often for longer durations and discuss fewer topics in more depth.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So I mean, there's some, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like one of the things that we talk about is like the things that managers should be spending their time on is like that need to make space for is one, yeah, you should be doing deal inspection and strategy. I don't think managers really have a hard time being kind of reminded to talk about deals with their reps because it's kind of like it's like a moth to the flame. But then there's a bunch of other things that they need to be spending their time doing, and so like that's tracking progress towards goals. But of course, not just the lagging indicators like bookings or opportunity creation, or pipe creation if you're SDR, but of course like the leading indicators, right? Like activity metrics, efficiency metrics, new opportunity inflow, those sort of things. They need to be doing one-on-ones that involve data distinct from one-on-ones or kind of pipeline review. They need to be paying attention to the ramp of new reps. But then this is the big thing that a lot of times managers are not doing because it's Robbie Halford, who's over at Sparrow. He used to run enablement at Heap, and then before that at Malwarebytes. He talks about random acts of enablement. Right, like
that's a
random
great
acts
term.
of
I
enablement.
love that. That's awesome.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing though, right? We're essentially like a manager. It's like, oh yeah, like I heard this thing and I'm like, I'm gonna coach you up on it really quickly. And it's kind of like weekend warrior stuff, where it's like, oh yeah, I got some opinions on that, versus like looking at a rep like in a data capacity and saying, hey, it is clear that you have a hitch in your giddy up here. Right. Like it is very clear that you have a win rate problem as compared to these other 15 mid-market sales reps. And then moreover, the problem with your win rate is that your conversion rate out of stage 4 proposal or whatever is dramatically off as compared to everybody else. That's the thing that we're going to tackle together. And like, we're going to honey badger that until it's fixed, as opposed to like a bunch of random acts of enablement on that rep, and like having that be. And then the flip side is, I think, is really important, which is identifying the success areas of your top performers, because like top performer is going to top perform, and kind of like seeing what the recipe of success is, and then such that you can apply it to everybody else. I think that's probably like those behaviors make it such that you're putting more wood behind less, fewer arrows, and really getting the rep to the point where they're changing their behavior and driving better outputs there. But like the important thing is like you got to be able to identify it first and then coach to it. And then of course random acts of enablement is like way easier.
Well, it doesn't require a lot of planning, right? It doesn't require a lot of forethought. And when you're in an environment like most sales managers are, where chaos is the norm, it doesn't feel very proactive. So they can work 20 hours a day and still not get half their to-do list done. I mean, it's an overwhelming environment. It's getting worse as things become a little bit more chaotic around the globe as well. But there's an
Yeah.
interesting thing that you brought up that I wanted to expand on, Pete. You talk about this whole idea about deal inspection and strategy.
Yeah.
And we agree with you that inspection is a critical behavior for sales managers.
Yeah, for sure.
And not only is it a critical behavior, but it quickly turns into a failure point. So when
Interesting.
managers are chatting with their sellers and inspecting their deals, it's very easy to start inspecting deal by deal by deal and go through 10 or 15 deals.
Yep.
And when managers are talking to reps about deals, their assumption is, well, this is coaching. And if a manager is inspecting a series of deals and you ask the seller, are you being coached right now? What do you think they're going to say?
They might say yes.
I don't
They,
think so.
they might erroneously think that it is, right? But yes, they don't feel like they're being coached. They feel like they're being inspected.
The manager will say it's coaching.
Right.
But if you ask the rep will say, well, no, this isn't coaching. He's inspecting my pipeline, which is necessary.
Right.
But the only reason we
totally.
should inspect the pipeline is for purposes of deciding what should we be coaching. To your point,
Exactly.
if the seller's having a giddy up problem in converting stage 4 to stage five, and their percentage of conversion is significantly lower, well, that's a data point. Now we need to dig into that. We need to dig into that when we do this deal inspection and find out what's going on in stage 4 that is, hindering your ability to successfully move to stage 5 or get a larger percentage of your deals from stage 4 to stage 5. So inspection really is just an arrow pointing to something that needs further inspection and clarification. Right?
That's right.
And so
that's right.
most managers don't take that pivot. They rely
move
on
on and then next.
Keep inspecting. Let me inspect the next one. Let me inspect the next one.
Yep.
And reps walk
versus
away
forming a pattern. Yeah, versus like forming a pattern and saying, oh, what's going on? It's the so I was it yesterday? I don't know. Our marketing team has me doing so many webinars that they'll like blend together. But it's the OODA loop stuff.
Yes.
Right.
That's right.
Which literally I have a slide on this now. I remember the last time we hung out when you were talking about that in your presentation. I was like, oh yeah, Boyd, right? Like fantastic. But it's like in this case, they're like the OODA loop, of course, is observe, orient, decide, act, and then loop back. And what you're talking about is like observe, 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 observe. And like if you're not doing any of the synthesis, right, which is the orienting, then like how can you say, hey, you know what? I keep seeing that all your deals like aren't multi-threaded. I have an idea of something that like maybe we ought to work on together, that like they have to do that synthesis moment, right? To then have a good prescription to deliver, which ideally drives good outcome. I wonder what is a good way of like helping those managers get better at synthesizing in that regard. What have you seen there?
You have to give them. So when we equip sales managers and salespeople, we don't teach them how to just manage or sell. We teach them how to analyze their environment, analyze their situation, choose the best path forward, execute that path, and then monitor response. And so that's the OODA loop in action. And so the reason managers don't leverage a lot of the tools they're given is because they don't know, well, here's a tool, here's what it does, here's why that matters, here's how I use it with my rep, and here's the outcome of that. So they don't look at it in terms of a broader decision-making framework. So even data, if I don't understand why the data that I'm seeing matters, I'm going to ignore it. And even if I intuitively know or intellectually know that this should matter, I don't always connect the dots. So it's this random acts of enablement. We keep giving managers tools and dashboards and things like that without teaching them, what does this mean? Why does it matter? How do I act on it? What do I do with it? What decisions does this help me make more effectively? And then how do I act on those decisions? And that's that sort of, it's that operating system that runs in the back of your computer and you don't even know it's there until all of a sudden you see a little circle going around and you're like, oh shit, it's not working. And then all of a sudden it's like, my operating system isn't working. Well, the same thing happens with sales managers. If they've got an effective management framework, an effective management process, it looks seamless, but there's some structure below all of that driving a more, I guess, normalized or deliberate set of management practices.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And we see that as well. I mean, we kind of talked about this, about how managers are insufficiently enabled, but I think the other thing, and this is what we think about with respect to Atrium quite a bit, is if you give them things that are like what as related to like data-driven management, if you give them tooling or like assets that are intended for analytical, like, you know, analytics folks, right, or sales operations folks or whatever, like that's it's kind of, you know, it's like not a winning, it's like not a winning strategy, because most of these managers are not, you know, they're like, they don't come from an analytical background, and that's not a bad thing, right? Because like as sellers, like we are, you know, we're persuaders and relationship builders and like empaths
yes,
and communicators and all those sort of things, and those are all like really important skills and very powerful, but you know, often they're not, you know, not highly correlated to kind of like analysis and kind of very left brainy sort of things. And so I mean, we do our best from a customer success standpoint to help folks, and we actually have all these like inspection like laminates that we give to folks, and of course our software works on this, but we definitely see it in a very meaningful way, is that like if you just throw a bunch of dashboards at somebody and say like, here you go, read the tea leaves, it's like definitely not like a winning strategy there. You can try to teach folks, but it ends up being kind of tough there. So actually, I mean, kind of like extending off of this, another one of the books that you know, that you contributed to, of course, is Cracking the Sales Management Code, which is the Bible of sales metrics, and you know, the importance around instrumenting not just outputs but also like intermediaries and kind of like inputs as well. I was thinking that maybe you could kind of share how that mixes with you know, with sales managers, because like it's
sure.
one thing for like, you know, sales operations or like leadership or whatever to be using these metrics in order to kind of like look across the entire organization, but if you can then drop down to a more tactical level where the managers
Sure.
are using that data, then you know, there's even more power to be unlocked.
So I'm actually going to start a little higher, Pete, and then I'll get down to the manager level. So we work with sales organizations worldwide. And one of the questions that we get often is, well, what metrics will you impact with your training?
Mhm.
And I question them right back and I say, what metrics do you want us to impact with our training?
There you go.
Because when we did the metrics research, we found there was no real rhyme or reason with how organizations were either measuring or managing these metrics, which is why we had to actually spend a lot of time sorting through them all and looking for patterns. It turned into a qualitative study versus a quantitative study.
Mhm.
And I believe that organizations tracked whatever they could, whether or not it was important. And every time someone new wanted a
Yeah,
new
exactly.
report, they created another report and didn't get rid of the old one. So one of the
Yeah,
organizations
just
that we work
add and
with,
add and add
yeah,
and add.
yeah, they had 28 management reports that they were sending sales managers every month. And I asked the sales managers, I said, how many of these reports do you actually use? And
Yeah,
the highest number I heard was 2.
yeah.
And every month, the sales operations group was generating 28 of those. So the bottom line, Pete, is that if organizations want to ensure that field level execution aligns
Mhm.
with organizational goals, they have to set the KPIs correctly, or sales objectives. If I
Mhm.
want to increase revenue, is it from new account acquisition or current account growth? Is it from
Mhm.
selling existing products or selling new products or different product mixes? Is it going after new customer segments or just obtaining more that are similar to what we have now? This lack of real planning at the
Yep.
organizational level leaves managers hanging out to dry. We're up in your quota by 20%, right? And we do have some KPIs around average selling price or recurring revenue. And go get them, Tiger. Here's your territory.
Have
And
fun.
managers just kind of scratch their heads and say, well, let's just keep doing more of what we were doing before, because in order to
Right.
get more output, we have to have more activity. And that's not
Mhm.
necessarily true. Um, that's why this alignment between goals like market share, revenue, customer sat, whatever those might be, there are very specific objectives that are the most direct path to the achievement of those
Right.
results. And I'll give you an example.
Right.
I'll give you an example of a disconnect that I recently saw. we have a very robust manager diagnostic called the Agile Edge. And it allows us to go in and get a very granular current state analysis of their management practices. And with this one organization that's in the medical device space, we learned that account planning was a really important initiative that was happening, within their sales force. So when we took a look at manager focus areas, account planning was a very high focus area.
So it's a key initiative. We're going to put some wood behind this arrow.
That's right, because they wanted to retain and grow existing accounts. Of course, so account planning makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. How do we measure it?
How do we measure it? And we look at a series of activities associated with account management and account planning. And this particular client was doing account planning because they wanted to grow existing accounts. They felt like their biggest growth area, they didn't need to go to get new accounts. There was so much area of growth within their current accounts that they couldn't even handle that, much less go after new accounts. So we took a look at the activities that managers were focused on within account management. And there were two activities that were really critical to current account growth that were a very low focus. So high focus on account planning, but very low focus on creating advocates within existing accounts, right, to speak on our behalf, and getting existing contacts to introduce us to new contacts in other divisions or departments. And I said,
seems like good things to potentially measure.
Well, right. And so I said, I think I've spotted your disconnect, because they were very dissatisfied with the fact that this account planning that had ramped up wasn't leading to more account growth. I said, well, tell me a little bit more about that. And then we looked at the measurements and we saw, here's a high area of focus, but here's a low area of focus. And this low area of focus was directly related to the kind of growth that they were looking for. So the devil's in the details, right? So you don't always measure that. You can measure how many account plans has a rep conducted. You can even look in the CRM, it's probably an attached document, look at the account plan. But there's elements within those activities that drive effectiveness of those activities that aren't always measured but need to be managed. And that's a prime example of that.
Dude, preach, because like we see this all the time where and oftentimes this is what happens when managers or like organizations are reductive in the metrics that they look at. Is like usually there's like we use the phrase harness, right? Like a metrics harness, and that can be around a rep or that could be around an initiative, right? So like use your example there, where you say, hey, it's really important for us to be cross-selling in these organizations, because as you pointed out, it's like a lot of low-hanging fruit. Okay, lovely, right? What we need to do is we need to have these account plans in place, and then we need to execute on them. Oh, what would the trappings of that execution look like? Well, it would probably be like net new contacts added to the CRM, or net new contacts engaged for the first time. Or, sorry, these are not ors, these are ands. And moreover, what it will probably look like is a self-sourced expansion ops being created by the AEs. And it doesn't have to be like 12. Like, I think that was just like 3 things that I said, or like 4 things I said, or whatever. It's just like, hey, this is how we know it's good. Like, this is how we know it's happening, right? And then bird dogging that to make sure, because if you're only looking at one thing, like, oh, okay, cool, like, are the reps filling out the account plans? It's like, oh, okay, well, this is a joke that we say on our team quite a bit, is like, we are here to close business, but and what that means is like, oftentimes the way that we close business is by having like meetings with managers, right? Or sorry, with prospects. But if for whatever reason, like you don't have to have a meeting in order to close the business, well, that's okay too, right? And so in this case, it's like, hey, the goal here is for us to sell more into our existing customer base. A mechanism by which to do that is to have a meaningful account plan, which then drives us to have incremental meetings with new stakeholders and create new expansion opportunities. It's not like the account plan is not the thing. It's like these things over here is where the rubber hits the road. But if you do this without the account plan, it will be less effective. So you got to do all of it and measure that all of it's happening.
Well, and you have to measure all of what's important, I think.
Exactly.
The challenge is that not everything can be equally important. Right. And that's why this whole idea of linking the most important results to the KPIs that matter and the activities that are most high impact. And it's not intuitive, Pete. People don't want to do that. It requires a tremendous amount of thought and prioritization to narrow things down. We're all good at doing a bunch of stuff. We're not good at paring it down to its essence. And to
Yeah.
be highly effective, you kind of do have to pare it down to its essence. There's probably 2 or 3 things that are most critical at any given time for any given sales role. And if managers don't know what those 2 or 3 things are, they don't know how to evaluate, they don't know how to coach, and then they don't know how to manage, right? So it's tough because without the prioritization, anything's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we see this a lot. This is something that we tell our customer success team all the time, like, because we have like a fingerprint of success of what like looks like a very healthy customer for us. It's like what we do is we measure the engagement of our customers, not at an organizational level, but instead at a manager level. And so usually what it ends up looking like is they're like in Atrium like a couple times a week, like 3 or 4 times a week. Like what we call like healthy is like in there 10 times and trailing 30 days. So it's like 2, 3, 4 times a week or what have you. And then what they're doing is usually what they're looking at is they're looking at like a half dozen or so views that are like really important to them for like whatever the initiative is. And then one of the things that Atrium does is it brings those views, those goal views, those alert feeds, those dashboards to the managers in their inbox, and then like in their email inbox and also in Slack. But it can't be too much. That's the important thing, right? It has to be enough so they're aware of it, right? And it's kind of like at bats, right? Where they can like, oh, I'll skip it this day, but I'll see it tomorrow, and catch the fact that like, my reps, my AEs are not prospecting, even though AE prospecting is a key initiative for us this quarter. I catch it, on Wednesday, even though I missed it on Monday. But it can't be like, hey, there's 10 things showing up on my inbox every day, because then like the signal to noise ratio is really off. And I think that's an important thing for leaders and sales operations to be empathetic about with the managers, is like, yeah, it's the thing you were saying earlier about an effective manager is coaching on fewer things but more meaningfully. Just like, I don't know if you're much of a golfer at all.
I am a golfer, Pete.
You are? Okay,
I
wonderful.
am.
So I think this might land. So an effective golf pro or golf coach doesn't have you change multiple things in your swing concurrently, right? Because it's bananas. Right? You say, hey, we're going to focus on this thing right here. You're going to keep your head down, or you're going to keep your arm straight, or you're going to, unlock your hip or whatever. We're going to do one of those things, and then we're going to do an entire bucket of range balls.
Right.
Focus on that one thing right there. So that's an important thing from a manager standpoint. The same is true coming top down, where if we could go to a manager and say like, hey, I need you to focus on these 5 initiatives, versus like, hey, look, what we're focused on right now is like, we need to self-source a lot more pipe. So you need to hold your team accountable to like AE prospecting. And then maybe like, we need to do a better job with pipeline hygiene and like, treating our marketing source pipe more effectively. Those 2 things. That's our goal for this quarter. And then here's the metrics that we're running, versus like, here's a dozen things that we're going to be paying attention to.
Right. And that's the challenge with data, because you want a wide variety of data available, right? Because different managers might be looking at different metrics, and based on the kind of roles and teams they manage, different things are important. So the hard thing for organizations in translating data to the manager level is different things are important to different managers. Different things are important to different roles. There's regional differences. There's country differences. I mean, there's so many variations. And that's one of the really important things that the managers of sales managers can help clarify. Because here's what happens. As I get promoted up the ranks in sales, I get farther and farther away from field execution. So what does that do to me? It makes me increasingly insecure, because I don't know about the deals. I don't know what's going on. The higher I get, the farther I am away from deal specifics. And what that does is it creates this insatiable appetite for data. Because I feel like if I have more data, I have control. But you don't really, not if you don't know what to do with that data, right? And in Cracking the Sales Management Code, Jason Jordan came up with a great analogy. And he said he came home one day and his mother was watching his daughter, and his toddler daughter is at the top of the stairs, and she's kind of moving around, and these are wooden stairs. And
he's like, oh
my God,
she could fall down the stairs, and his mom says, it's okay, I've got my eye on her, she's fine. He's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
You're
You got
20
your
yards,
eye on her. Yeah, you're not going to
20
stop her
yards
from
away.
falling. Yeah, you're not going to stop her from falling down the stairs. And it's the same problem with high-level sales leadership, because they feel like, I've got all this data, I'm in control, I know what's going on. No, you actually don't. And
Right.
the more you drive your sales managers to provide more data, the less they're actually digging into real deals. And if they are digging into deals, they're probably digging into them at the wrong time. Right? So you talk a lot about deal inspection and deal strategy. Where do you think the most effective deal strategy occurs in that buying process? Is it early? Is it mid? Is it late? What's your experience?
I mean, generally speaking, if deals are won in discovery, and
That's right.
and making sure there's actual need and kind of mapping things out versus getting to fake down funnel is one of the phrases that I use.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're at proposal. No, you're not. You just think you are.
Right. And so to your point, Pete, you said, managers are going to get involved in deals. They just are. Like, that's the lifeblood of a sales team, is deals. And managers will always get involved in deals mid to late stage, because that's when the competition heats up. That's when negotiation happens. That's when terms need to be adjusted. I mean, that's the exciting stuff. The early stage qualification isn't exciting. It's just very important. And so when you talk about inspection and deal strategy, the highest performing managers inspect those deals early stage, not only to make sure they're healthy deals that should be in the pipeline, but are sellers really qualifying appropriately? Is it a real deal? Is it a deal we want? Does it have the criteria that meets a viable deal for our organization? And when managers switch some portion of their focus to those earlier stages, pipelines get healthier and win rates improve. So that's one of those causal factors that are not obvious.
Yeah.
If you ask a manager, do you want to get involved early stage? They'll say, no, that's boring. That's not where I shine. Well, that's right. It's why professional football players and soccer players run drills. The same drills all the time. Do they know how to run those drills? Of course they do. Why do they run them? To keep themselves sharp.
Yeah, exactly. Since we're getting towards the top of the hour here, what I thought we could talk about is this notion of organizational agility and why it's so important for managerial enablement. Maybe you can kind of share some of your findings and kind of research around that.
So the reason we call it organizational agility versus just organizational alignment is because stuff changes fast, right?
Yeah,
I mean, think about what happened over the last 24 months. Everybody's life was turned upside down. We didn't see this coming. We were all hit in the face, and we just were like, oh my God. And organizations they didn't know how to deal with it. And so we thought, oh, this is a unique situation. It's never going to happen again. I don't think that's true. Maybe it won't be another pandemic, but there's going to be something else that happens.
There will always be a new thing. There will always be a new thing.
And so organizational leaders, especially sales leaders, they get insecure because they have these great strategies on how to penetrate new markets, how to grow their market share, how to get better net promoter scores, all these perfect things. And they put these great strategies in place. And guess what? They're completely reliant on frontline execution.
Something changes. Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Where does the rubber hit the road? Right. Where does the rubber hit the road?
If salespeople aren't doing what I need for them to be doing, my strategy falls flat. And then it looks like it's my fault. Maybe I set the wrong strategy. No, you didn't. You set the right strategy. But what happened is your field reps and managers didn't execute the way you wanted to against that strategy. So this idea of organizational alignment equips sales managers and leaders to be able to ensure that field level execution, what my reps are doing day in and day out, is aligned to the KPIs that matter most and directly aligned to the results we're holding accountable for. And when market conditions change, I need to realign. When strategy changes or new initiatives or new products come out, I need to realign. It's like that OODA loop, Pete. It's this constant evaluation of, is execution
100%.
aligned to marketplace realities and organizational results? And it's not stagnant. This isn't something you do in January and you're done with it. Because by June, a new competitor will be in the market. Something will have happened with the economy. There might be a new regulation in Europe that ties your hands even more than it did before, right? So all these things keep changing. And if you don't have a mechanism for incorporating new information into the way that you're making decisions and executing, you can't keep up. And those
Man, I feel we
organizations
should
that are
do,
most agile do this.
we should do another one of these events where you talk about like OODA Loop and like organization agility, and we can give out copies of Boyd. I think that'd be really,
Perfect. Yeah.
I think
He's a
that
fascinating
would be,
character. Yeah.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I still haven't seen the, whatever the, like his famous deck was that, like, of course was all like, you know, what are the like transparencies, like overhead transparencies,
Oh,
like
yeah.
back in the day.
Yeah. That was
Is
really something.
is like his famous OODA deck or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that like when you think about that, like there's always, especially like I live in high growth startup land, right? And there's always going to be new things that are showing up, whether that's like, and sometimes they're not external shocks, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, we need to go up market. Okay, cool, let's go up market. Like we want to raise our ASPs. Well, guess what? Like when you go and start going up market and engaging with those accounts, their buying process is going to be different. Their existing kind of like technology stack is going to be different. Their needs are going to be different, all those sort of things. And so if you're not able to ingest that information and like pivot accordingly, it's going to be really problematic. And so, you know, as a product marketer or as a sales leader or whatever, when then like you gather that information and then you need to package it into playbooks such that then people execute against it. Well, guess what? Who's going to authenticate that those playbooks are happening and make sure that it's actually being driven into the field? It's going to be the frontline management. So if you don't have that, if you don't have the capability for a manager to take a new playbook or run book or, you know, even like battle card or things like that, explain it appropriately to their reps in their, ideally, right, because calendar is destiny, in their weekly, you know, enablement hour. We actually have that in our organization. We have a weekly enablement hour with our account executive team, and like we just literally, like we have an agenda or like a Google Doc where we just like put things in the future, like, oh man, you know what, we really need to talk about XYZ. We don't just like send an email to the team and are like, okay, cool, like everyone's trained now. You put it in the agenda and say, and then, you know, prioritize which of these things you're gonna go and work on. But if you don't have that muscle, then, you know, you're not going to be able to apply those things. Any kind of like parting thoughts on this, Michelle, before we wrap up here? This was like super rad as usual, unsurprisingly.
Well, I'm so glad that you had me join your conference, Pete. I always enjoy spending time with you and kind of kicking around ideas. It's super fun. I guess
Nice.
if I'm to leave you with a parting thought, it's don't just think about coaching, think about decision making, because everything that a manager does is about decision making. And if they don't make the better decisions or the right decisions, everything that happens after that is going to be marginalized. So decisions about which metrics matter, decisions about what kind of coaching matters, decisions about which activities align with KPIs and results, right? All of those things, all those decisions drive either effective, aligned execution or create more chaos.
Yep.
Prioritization matters.
Yep, for sure. Wonderful. Well, folks, if you want to get a copy of Michelle's book, which is absolutely fantastic, and one of our lovely you know, Atrium coffees for closers, Yetis, we'll go ahead and drop the link here for folks to go ahead and grab there. You can just go ahead and sign up for that. Michelle, thank you very much for taking the time to hang out. This is fantastic. I'm sorry that your European cruise was unfortunately unfortunately scrubbed.
Okay.
But I guess the nice thing is that we got to hang out together. And for folks who are interested in, you know, bringing data into their managerial rhythms and using data to coach at that managerial level to enable those managers to have more success and to use metrics and data to improve the performance of those AEs and SDRs and what have you, again, at the managerial level where rubber hits the road. You know, encourage you to check out Atrium. You can sign up for a free account. It takes like 3 minutes to just connect your Salesforce account via read-only connection, and you're on your merry way. So, Michelle, you have a great rest of your day. Okay, thank you.
You too, Pete. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.